After the stress of the holiday season and the winter months, many struggling couples make the decision to file for divorce. And while this process is never easy, there are a few things you can do to avoid unnecessary complications for you and your family. And divorce attorney Kyung Dickerson is here to explain. Hello to you. Thanks for coming on to LTL.
Thanks for having me.
How expensive is a divorce? Because we hear often that it can be financially devastating.
It depends on how you handle it. Just like anything else, if you handle it intelligently, calmly, unemotionally, it can be relatively inexpensive and relatively easy despite the emotional drama.
All right. It's $20,000. Is that the typical figure that's thrown out at least for a divorce in 2015?
Well, it varies depending on whether you have children and how extensive your property is. There are plenty of stories where people sit down with a bottle of wine and a notepad and they divide things up between themselves, take it to an attorney to work out the details to make it happen. But when it's emotionally driven, when there are children, when there are issues where one person just can't be practical about it, then yes, it can get very expensive.
You recommend that people consider a few things before they move forward with a divorce. It's important to know what documents you need, etc. Let's talk about some of the upfront costs that people need to consider. What are they?
Education. You need to educate yourself about what your finances are. In every marriage, we divide things up. One person takes out the trash, the other person buys the groceries. Well, generally, there's one person who does most of the economic planning. They know where the bank accounts are. They know how to get copies of various statements. The other person needs to do all of that, too. So they need to go review the bank account statements, review the mortgage statements, review all of the documents that educate themselves about what their estate is.
How important are taxes in all of this?
Oh, taxes can take a huge cut into anything, and depending on what you divide. For example, some people think, well, I'll get half the retirement and I can take the money out and use it to buy a house. They don't appreciate the fees and the taxes that will cut into about 30–40% of what they withdraw. They won't have that available to them.
You were talking earlier about making sure that you have all your documents and stuff involved with this. In terms of debts, though, isn't it important, too, for couples to go over the various debts, the various credit cards that they might have together?
Absolutely. And often there will be people who have separate credit cards. So we'll have an us credit card, a yours and mine credit card. And if someone has a credit card that you don't know about, that might be driving them to refuse to settle, or they just can't settle on certain terms because they're carrying a $15,000, $25,000 credit card debt that you know nothing about.
Oh my gosh, that can be really a problem. Beneficiaries. I remember a situation that a friend was telling me about. The husband remarried, but he didn't change the beneficiary. He died, and then the former wife got the benefit of the insurance policy. Don't do that. Make sure you change your beneficiaries.
Make sure you change your beneficiary designations, but often that can't happen until after you're divorced. We had one situation where husband and wife were married. They were going to get divorced on Monday. She was the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. He passed away that Sunday in a fatal car accident. Because they weren't divorced, she still received the entirety of the life insurance benefit.
Very interesting. In order to make this go smoothly, you've got to get along, don't you?
We don't necessarily have to get along, but you need to be able to talk.
Okay.
It's like in any office, for example, where you're not best friends with everybody, but you have a functioning, working relationship with them.
It'll make it less expensive, won't it?
It'll make it insanely less expensive, yes.
Doesn't really help you, but it can help the couple dramatically.
Well, I don't think necessarily there's a shortage of people who are getting divorced, so I'm not so much worried about me.
Of dragging it all out, huh?
Yes.
All right. Also, even if you're not sure that you're actually going to go through with a divorce, if you're even thinking about it, or if it looks like your spouse may be considering that option, go ahead and get in touch with someone who's an expert in all of this. Call a lawyer, call somebody that you can really talk to and review what you need to know.
Absolutely. It takes thousands and thousands of dollars to fix if you start off on the wrong foot. And most
Is that
attorneys,
right?
oh, absolutely. Most attorneys will consult with you so that you know the decisions you're making, the repercussions of those decisions. For example, if you find out that your spouse is having an affair and you choose to stay with them, there are repercussions. There are legal as well as financial repercussions to that decision. And if you know what they are and you choose to make that decision anyway, you can. It's absolutely your life. But you should know that.
Have you ever had anybody who pursued divorce and then once they got into it and realized how involved it was, they changed their mind?
Yes.
That's good to know. All right, let's talk about a prenup, because if you don't, to avoid much of this and make it much simpler, you can always do a prenup when you get married.
You can always do a prenup when you get married, and it helps. It's like premarital counseling. It forces you to talk about your finances, about your expectations, about how you plan your financial future, whether you're a saver or a spender, that sort of thing. It's not necessarily a precursor to a divorce, but it helps have that conversation. And this day and age, there are children in their 20s and 30s who are now inheriting from their parents and grandparents. So it's their parents who want them to get the prenup, or people who are career people who are marrying later in life and they've built up an estate and they don't want to necessarily put that all in jeopardy.
All right, Kyung Dickerson, we thank you very much for your advice. And coming up...